This is Bill Newman, WHMP.
I'm Josh Silver, in for Bill Newman. We have a very special guest today, and another very special guest introducing that very special guest, Rich Michelson. Welcome to the studio.
Okay, we should have had somebody introduce you and go right around the thing.
Who's
introduced me? What? Yeah, let's go around. So I have a very special guest for sure. This is our session of NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio. And my guest today is Afaa Michael Weaver. This is going to be an incredible interview with a wonderful poet. And let's just start out and get this out in the open. A Baltimore fan.
Yes,
Okay.
Orioles,
but he lives in Boston, so we'll get back to that later. All right, we just want to get it out of the way before we get started. So, Afaa Michael Weaver is reading tonight at Smith College at 7:30 in Sealy, and he's been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, a Fulbright Scholar. He just won the Kingsley Tufts Award, and let's get the elephant out of the room here. Yes, that's a $100,000 award to a poet, and it is an especially important award because it's chosen by other poets, and as opposed to I mean, it's really an award of your peers. And congratulations.
Well, thank you, Rich. Thank you.
Don't blow it all on dictionaries and thesauruses now.
Yeah. What are you going to do with that money? Should we start?
I'll plop it all down on one high-end car,
All right. And
I have to say, though, for the record, as I was reading a Time magazine story, I also noticed, though, an endless list of became a playwright, a Fulbright Scholar, Pushcart Prize winner, university professor, and published poet, fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. I mean, this is but one of many really prestigious awards.
And the reading tonight is called "With Our Eyes Open: Poems of the New American Century," and it's to mark the publication of a new anthology, which are poems interested in promoting peace and justice, struggles of the world's outcasts, immigrants, working classes. And that kind of brings us to you. So you are a poet who was a steel worker worked for 15 years in factories. Your dad was a steel worker. Your mom was a beautician. You're really coming out of the working class. You're one of 5 kids. Take us on this journey. How does a kid growing up in the inner city find poetry and fall in love with it?
Well, I was in love with my first wife, a young lady who became my first wife, and I started writing. But my parents came up from Virginia in the last leg of the Great Migration, and my father was raised as a sharecropper. And I'm the oldest of 5 kids, so they didn't finish high school, and I was the cadet. I was the one to break ground, etc. So I started university when I was 16 years old in 1968 and dropped out.
Huh? Were there books in your house?
It was the Bible.
It was the Bible, right?
There were encyclopedias that my mom got from A&P when she went grocery shopping. They were, I think, 99 cents, and each week she picked up one volume, then she completed the volume. That was it.
And you were going to be the kid who kind of brought the family to the next level with education. That was stressed.
It was, and they put me into the accelerated program, so I skipped the 8th grade. And then they put me into a high school, Baltimore Polytechnic, for engineering. So I was on track to be an engineer. And I went to the University of Maryland in engineering. And when I dropped out, I was a social major, kind of.
So were they, obviously learning was emphasized. Were they proud when you started writing? Were they nervous?
They were
had a
proud.
Real job?
They were proud when I went into the University of Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
When I came home talking about being a writer, they were confused.
Mm-hmm.
And when I eventually left factory life in 1985, my father thought I was making the biggest mistake in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I had medical care. I was at Procter & Gamble at that time. I had guaranteed employment, which was industrial tenure. So, he thought I was making a big mistake.
But what made you make that shift from going in as an engineer but coming out as a writer?
my first wife, falling in love, it was the poetry of courtship, and I wrote my way into a marriage.
But did you have a mentor? Did you have somebody who inspired you to write?
After I had been in the world of the factory for 3 or 4 years, I met Lucille Clifton. And Lucille Clifton was the first poet I had any connection to who was actually out there in the literary world. And she was very important to me in terms of my development. And I wrote while I was in the factory, loading trucks and et cetera. I was at the steel mill for 1 year. And then in 1971, I went to P&G and stayed there till 85.
But if you were writing while you're at the factory, were you writing really as self-therapy, or did you think that, eventually I want people to read this?
Well, I sent poems to Hanging Loose magazine up in Brooklyn back in 78, and they began to publish me, and they took me seriously. They wrote back to me, Mark Pollack, Ron Schreiber, those guys. And that was sort of my beginning of publishing with some consistency. And then when Reagan won the first election in 1980, I wrote an op-ed for the Baltimore Sun. And so the last 5 years I was at Procter & Gamble. I was a freelancer for the Sun at the same time.
So the other guys on the factory floor, did they knew you were writing poetry? Were they curious? Did you read poems to them?
Well, yeah, I read a poem to one guy. Mike was his name, too. My birth name was Michael. So I said, Mike, I wrote this poem, man. Take a look at it. And he said, that ain't no poetry, man. He said, the real poetry is like, 19th century British romantics. What is this stuff you're writing, And then he said, don't show me anymore. And I didn't ask you to show that to me anyway, but one day I did a feature story for the Baltimore Sun. I had a byline in the paper, and I came into the warehouse, and one of the guys said, how did you do that, So there was some disbelief, even though they knew that I was doing it. And I also found it difficult to believe at times myself.
You're listening to NPR on WHMP with my guest, Afaa Michael Weaver. So here's my question as far as, let's say, reading to the factory workers, reading to the common man and woman, as it were. Is that connect possible? I mean, your work really... it's amazing for its diversity. First of all, it's political, it's personal. It can connect with everyone. I'm going to ask you to read in a moment. Is that something you're aiming to do, or are we trying to reach a wider audience? Can this poetry change people's lives, get them out of factories?
Well, I have a kind of faith that if I just be myself, as much as I know that to be, then I will attract an energy that will make it accessible to people. I think my work is at the same time is accessible and inaccessible at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm Josh Silver in for Bill Newman. We're talking to Afaa Michael Weaver, a poet who will be reading tonight at 7:30 at Seeley Hall at Smith College. Amazing story, and we're going to come back in a minute with some poetry.
This is Bill Newman, WHMP.
Hi, this is Rich Michelson. You're listening to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio, with my guest, Afaa Michael Weaver, who will be reading tonight at Smith College in Seeley, 106 at 7:30. Poems of peace and justice, struggles of the world's outcasts, immigrants, and working classes. Let's start this session with a poem so people get a flavor of your work, if you would.
This is American Income, and was inspired by an article that said every category of the population can raise their income by losing weight, except black men, so we can get as fat as we want. Still, American Income. The survey says all groups can make more money if they lose weight, except black men. Men of other colors and women of all colors have more gold. But black men are the summary of weight, a lead-thick thing on the scales, meters spinning until they ring off the end of the numbering of accumulation. How things grow heavy, fish on the ends of lines that become whales, then prehistoric sea life beyond all memories. The billion days of human hands working, doing all the labor one can imagine. Hands now the population of cactus leaves on a papyrus moon waiting for the fire. The notes from all their singing gone up into the salt breath of tears of children that dry, rise up to be the crystalline canopy of promises. The infinite gone fishing days with the apologies for not being able to love anymore. Gone down inside earth somewhere where women make no demands, have fewer dreams of forever, these feet that marched and ran and got cut off, these hearts torn out of chests by nameless thieves, this thrashing until the chaff has gone out, and black men know the gold of being the dead center of things, where pain is the gateway to Jerusalem's body trees, places for meditation and howling, keeping the weeping heads of gods in their eyes.
Wow. Y'all, I hope will show up tonight to hear more poems. That was absolutely unbelievable. Can poetry, well, this is a funny way to put it and just drop it on you. Can poetry make a difference? I mean, it made a difference in your life. Can it make a difference in people's lives? Can it be heard? Should it be?
It should be heard. I still maintain that if they would reserve a rack for poetry in airports, the books would sell.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially if you have some audio to go with it, they would sell.
Right.
But those racks are extremely competitive, as you know. But I think that marketing is a key to that. But poetry inspires people, and the function of poetry that way can be enhanced, I think.
Mm.
You know, I think about African American people and the whole question of political poetry actually doing anything for the community. But, you know, I have relatives who work in some really hardcore areas in Baltimore in terms of one of my sisters is a psychiatric social worker in a community-based outpatient program. And these are people with hardcore cases. So the trench work, so to speak, is being done by them. But I think their poetry can inspire them. You know, there's a place for poetry in all of that.
The thing that I keep going back to in regards to poetry and sort of more of the working class is that it seems to be cultural with our country in the United States in particular. When you take, for example, the Chilean miners who were trapped underground, one of the things that they did almost immediately was elect a poet amongst themselves as miners to help them navigate the fact that they may never come out of there, and to help encourage them and give them hope that they would eventually see their families one day. And that really touched me in a way that made me think my culture and the way I was raised doesn't resonate with poetry, where I would have ever even thought we need to elect a poet immediately to get us through this.
Yeah.
I think American culture is still very young. The place of poetry in Hispanic culture is unified by language. You know, you have Spanish all over Latin America, and but the United States, I think, is still finding its way to that, and hopefully we'll come to understand that that is the voice of the soul.
Right. Well, you've certainly transformed your life. There's so much. I mean, we could talk to you for hours. I know your work gets into PTSD, your health, heart failure, sexual abuse. I mean, there are so many areas, and you've really transformed yourself, your life. You've taken a recent turn, actually, towards Tai Chi and Chinese literature. And I'm wondering if you could maybe read us a poem influenced by your Chinese studies.
A poem influenced by my Chinese studies. From the Government of Nature. I actually started writing this book in a monastery in Taiwan where I was teaching Tai Chi to the nuns. And,
see, I mean, this is not your run-of-the-mill life, people.
And I've been doing Tai Chi since I was in my late 20s. But when I went to Taiwan on the Fulbright, I came back and decided to study Chinese more intensely, and I had a sabbatical. So I moved to Taiwan in November of 2004 and lived there for 8 months to get the immersion experience and get deeper. And so a friend of mine said, well, come to the monastery for a while and we'll help you with your Chinese, which they did not do. And so, but this is I wrote this poem in the monastery, and it's not in Chinese. So in Chinese, I would say 不是中文, 是英文的. Leaves. The lines that make you are infinite, but I count them every day to hear the stories you carry. These are not secrets but records, things we should know but ignore. If I commit the sin of tearing you from the tree, I find another world inside the torn vein, another lifetime of counting the records of who walked here before, of what lovers lay here holding each other through wars and starvation. Some days I stand here until I lose focus and travel, drifting off out of the moment too full of it, and my legs are now like trees, mindless but vigilant, held into the earth by the rules of debt, what we owe to nature for trying to tear ourselves away. I drift and the pleasure of touch comes again, layers of green in the mountainside a tickling in my palms. The pleasure is that of being lost here in the crowd of trunks and pulp, the ground thick with the death of you, sinking under my feet as I go, touching one and another, linking myself through until the place where I entered is gone. When I am afraid, my breath is caught in my throat. When I am not afraid, I lift both hands up under a bunch of you to find the way the world felt on the first day. So I wrote that in English while living in Taiwan studying Chinese.
I mean, what a journey! What a journey! I mean, do you feel? I mean, do you understand your experiences? You're always looking for new experiences. Is this something you're consciously reaching out towards, or is life just leading you?
Life is leading me, I think. I've gone all kinds of places. I have medals I won in martial arts tournaments in Tai Chi. I have a gold medal, 2 silvers, and 3 bronzes. And one of my colleagues said to me, "That's not bad for an old guy." So,
and who knew that the Kingsley Tufts Award would kind of bring you to us here today. Thank you so much, Afaa Michael Weaver.
Thank you.
I hope people will listen in this evening. It's a pleasure to have you on our show today, and I look forward to having you back.
And that was Rich Michelson. Again, the poetry reading for Peace and Justice in a Time of War and Discrimination. It's tonight, April 1st, 7:30 p.m., Sealy 106 at Smith College. I want to say for the record, it is April 1st, and we did not pull a prank on Monty today. Did you notice that?
Not yet. If
No.
you do it on the air, we open ourselves up to all sorts of legal ramifications. So I'm glad that you didn't do that.
I'm Josh Silver. I've been in for Bill Newman for a few days. That's it. Bill will be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening, and have a great Tuesday.
Excellent job filling in, Josh Silver. You can learn more about his organization at represent.us. Represent us.